Now we discuss about the differences in taking input in an array and in a string. Now it's quite cumbersome to take input in an array. We have to write a heck of a lot of code to take input in an array. So the first thing that we are assuming that we are taking inputs using the scanner class. Therefore, your program should import the scanner class from the java.util package. Moreover, in the main method, you should have already created an object of the scanner class having the name sc. Right now, inside in the main method, the first thing that you would do for taking input in an array is you would take the size of the array from the user first. How long does the user want his array to be for accommodating his elements? Now, the next thing that you do is you allocate memory to the array through the use of the new operator. All right. So you write int arr square bracket equals new int size. All right. Now, next, you take the elements of the array as input. Now, to do this, you run a loop, you run a for loop, and the loop variable would contain the indexes of the valid index range. So, a valid index range for an array is between 0 to arr.length, and that's exactly what I have done. I have run a loop from arr.length minus 1, that's indicated by less than, and I'm taking input one by one. But for strings, the things are much simpler than arrays. So for taking input in a string, we have two ways actually, all right? So we are assuming that we are taking input through the help of scanner class, all right? So we can take inputs which consists of single words. For example, the name of a fruit, etc consists of single words, right? Which consists of no spaces. So if you are taking inputs which contains no spaces, then you would write this to take an input. So you would first give the user a prompt, enter the name of a fruit, and then you would write string str equals sc dot next. And this would take the word, the first word from the user. Now, if the user happens to enter a string that consists of multiple words, for example, let's say my name, all right? So if I would have given my name as input, then str would only contain consist of Ronoja, right? It would not contain Shaha because whenever it finds a space, it terminates taking inputs, right? So the next method should only be used when you are taking a single word from the user that contains no spaces at all. But there are many instances when you would want to take strings, those strings which contain spaces as inputs. So for those cases, you're going to use another method of this a scanner class, which is known as the next line method, right? So for taking inputs, containing multiple words separated by spaces, you would write sc dot next line, right? So this denotes the differences in taking inputs in an array and in a string. So for an array, it's a little cumbersome. We need to write a loop, we need to allocate memory. But with strings, it's much like taking an integer input or a double input or a float input, right? We already have a function for that. Okay. Now, moving on to the last part of our discussion. That is, how do we display the content or traverse through an array or a string? For example, we have an array containing 5 elements starting from 1 to 5, and we want to display each element of the array comma separated. Now, to do that, we would need a help of a loop. Now, we are running a loop from 0 to arr.length minus 1, that is the valid index range of an array, and then we are accessing each element, that is the ith element, and printing each element separated by a comma. All right, so this line does that. Now, after this, we for reasons such as the next output, we want our cursor to start from the next line after printing the elements comma separated, and that's why we have put in a println statement that would take our cursor from the line it was printing the elements, and it would take the cursor next. So system.out.println basically is functioning as pressing an enter key. All right. Now, displaying the content of a string is quite straightforward, right? So if you want to display the entire content of the string or the entire string, then you would just write the name of the variable inside of print or inside of println to display the entire content of a string. So in these two, and both the cases, Avengers would be printed or displayed on the screen, right? Now next, you might want to display the contents of the string comma separate. So to do that, to facilitate that, first we need to calculate the length of the string and store it in the variable. Now, why do we need to do this? And why don't we do the same thing in case of an array? Well, in case of an array, the length is not calculated. Whenever the array is allocated memory, the length of the array is fixed. But the length function basically calculates the length of the array. So what's the point of calculating the length of the array every single time? We can calculate the length of the array just one time before displaying, right? So to prevent recalculation of the length of the array, we store the length of the array in a variable, all right? And next we run a loop that goes from 0 to length minus 1, and we display each element of the array that can be obtained using the line str.char at I, and then append a comma at the end of it. And this helps us to display the elements of the string comma separated, right? And for the same reason as before, we put a blank println such that our cursor moves to the next line after printing all the elements of the string in the same line, right? Now, uh, we have come to the end of our discussion of the basics of arrays and strings. Now that we are equipped with the basic knowledge of strings, you will now be able to write programs on strings. All right. So coming up next, we solve a few questions on strings. All right. So until then, see you. Bye-bye.